It's super exciting to be here. You're all in your afternoon, and we're just starting our morning. It's 7 a.m. over here in Australia. I love the virtual world because it allows us to connect with people all around the globe. So I'll quickly introduce myself, and then we'll move into introducing the panelists. And then we're going to be diving into this fantastic Q&A so that you can get guidance and tips and advice to really help you on your journey as graduates, moving through the stage where you're applying for roles and then securing roles as you move out of that grad phase. So super excited for you. My name is Shadé Zahrai. I'm a career performance specialist, and I specialize in self-mastery. So I run a business with my husband called Influenceo Global, and we work with mainly Fortune 500s around the world, helping people to land their first jobs, to excel in their careers, and really give them the fulfillment that they're looking for. And what we do is we also share content online. So Instagram, TikTok, we're constantly sharing professional development content, personal development content, really helping people get to the next level. Now, we just launched our own Interview Essentials program on Udemy as well just 2 weeks ago. And in 2 weeks, we have over 9,000 students. So it's amazing. And it highlights that this is a really relevant topic for a lot of people. Now, I remember my own experience. I spent 10 years in corporate. I remember when I was starting out as a grad myself. So I know how nerve-wracking and anxiety-inducing it can feel to know, what am I supposed to do? Where do my skills align? And that's why I'm so excited to actually be here. So a big thank you to Monster for the opportunity and for putting on this initiative. So now let's hand over and hear from some of our panelists. So let's hear from Adriana first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adriana Garcia. I'm a university recruiter at Pinterest. Have been in the recruiting space for several years, so excited to help answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Adriana. And Andrea.
Hi, I'm Andréa Juliano. I'm with CVS Health, and I'm on our corporate university relations team as a program manager, and I support our internship, our externship, and many of our full-time leadership development programs as well.
Thank you, Andrea. And Ashley.
Good afternoon. My name is Ashley Jefferson. I'm the Senior Manager of Early Career and Talent Outreach at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. I work as a member of our Early Careers team, so helping manage all of our internships, co-ops, and fellowship opportunities, as well as a member of our Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity as well.
Thank you, Ashley, Andrea, and Adriana. It's wonderful to have you with us. We can't wait to hear some of your insights and guidance for graduates. So let's start at the beginning. We know that it has been a crazy year. 2020 threw everything upside down, especially for people coming into the job market, and it's still continuing. There's still so much uncertainty. I'd love to hear from you. What do you think has been the biggest impact of the pandemic when it comes to grads who are actually looking for their first full-time roles? And anyone can jump in.
I'll start with that one. I think it's a bit twofold, right? I think, the biggest impact is that some organizations reduce their hiring for the year. So there are, at the onset, at least fewer jobs that were available and same amount of candidates that were more candidates that were looking. So, a tighter candidate market in that sense. But I think one of the largest challenges is that a lot of this, the process and then things that are going on, the changes that are happening are new to both the organizations and the candidates that are starting their first job in school. So everyone's learning at the same time. So the expectations and the norms that you would normally have going into a role, being on site, being able to connect and sit down with your manager and really shadow them, you don't have that opportunity. So a lot of it is of what you're going to have to do in your first month or 2 months of a role is going to be challenging to learn sort of on your own without being side by side or next to someone else.
Yeah, and to add, sorry, go ahead.
No, please. I was just going to say, very valid. Changing expectations makes it really tough to navigate this.
Yes. Pinterest was fortunate enough to be able to still do a virtual internship program last summer, but, we heard a lot of companies had to postpone or, as Ashley was saying, just change up, how we're doing internships. And I think that can impact a lot of our candidates, right? If they weren't able to have an internship last summer and there's potentially that missed opportunity for an intern to then transition to full time. So I think that they're definitely going through a lot of changes right now, and it's been a tough year.
Andrea, any thoughts from you?
I think for us, as Adriana was saying, we were fortunate enough to still be able to host our internship program last year and provide that experience for a large group of interns. But I think for individuals who are starting who may not have, had that internship experience, or if you had, I think this year, what I would say is just to kind of come into it open-minded, right? Because things are changing. And I think a lot of companies are still figuring out what's it actually going to all look like? What is it going to look like when we do return to work? Is everyone going to return? Is it only going to be certain teams? So I think for a new grad, that can be very daunting. But I think if you keep an open mind, I think that's one piece that can help in coming into it, and just understand that I don't think anyone has it all figured out. But I think that relying kind of on your team and really getting to know your team as much as you can when you start will help you so that you can feel more comfortable moving through whatever other changes are going to come forward.
Absolutely. And such great guidance there, because there is still so much uncertainty. And to your point, I don't think anyone's got it figured out yet. So coming into it with an open mind, coming into it with the desire to learn, and also speaking up. So if you are in a position where you need extra support, or you're confused about something, or you need clarity, having the confidence to actually ask for that support and guidance, because everyone is so supportive right now, knowing that we're all managing this, we're all navigating this as best as we can. So some great pieces of guidance in there. Now, I'm really curious to get your thoughts when it comes to the interview itself. So the very first question I have, I know that a lot of interviews are taking place virtually over video, which is a very, very different experience to when you're in a room with people. So in your experience, what would you say are the things that a candidate can do to make a really strong first impression and to really convey that they are the right person for a position?
There are a number, I jump in again. I think there are a number of things you can do. One is always be prepared, right? As you would in person, be prepared for the interview, do your research, know the organization. Don't ask questions that you can find on the front page or on their career site or their website. So be prepared. But in the virtual environment, make sure that if there are others in your household, make sure they know that you're interviewing, and ask for that quiet time for that period of time. Make sure you have a good connection on your internet so it's not as jumpy or spotty. But just have your resume in front of you. Take notes. Ask questions. You can have a cheat sheet in front of you, as you wouldn't be able to necessarily have in person. So have the questions laid out, be prepared, make sure you dress the part. It's an important piece. I know sometimes people think that they're at home and they may not necessarily need to do all of that, but dressing the part as well is very important. And just your attitude and the energy that you bring to the interview is going to come through the computer as well. So it's important to bring that and as much as you can, make eye contact, but make sure you're engaging and asking questions and you seem interested. You're not just interested internally, but you appear to be interested to the team as well.
And I would just add, I think, don't forget the interpersonal components just because it's on video. So it is a little bit kind of off-putting initially, especially if you were interviewing before in person. So I think it's important not to lose those pieces. So as Ashley was saying, come and be prepared for the interview, but also still be prepared to be yourself and have a conversation with people, as much as you can. And, don't forget kind of some of those things. I've seen a lot of candidates, make the mistake of kind of coming off as either too rigid or too rehearsed on video, and you don't want to do that. You still want to feel somewhat natural. But I also agree with what Ashley said about, I think it can be an advantage to being prepared and having notes in front of you and some of those things that you may not necessarily do in person, but don't let that take over the interview.
Yep. I would echo a lot of what has already been shared, and stressing the importance of being able to test your video and audio in advance. I think that's just an added element that we are now living in. And so just getting comfortable with that and how your video is presenting you with the angles and whatnot. And then of course, just coming prepared to your interview. Definitely, I think treating it like you are in person, I think will just help naturally flow the same way that it would virtually. But yeah, the tech piece has been, I think, a big aspect. And I always share with my candidates as they're gearing up for their interview day to, if there are any glitches or anything like that, it's like, no worries, we'll help you through that. It's something that we all are dealing with. So it can be stressful, but we'll work together to figure it out.
I just add one more thing. I would say make sure that you have an appropriate background. If you're in college or you're at home and you're in your room, make sure you have a clean, sort of appropriate background. And if not, put up a filter and just make sure that it is appropriate for the interview.
Yes, brilliant guidance, everyone. So basic logistical things in terms of making sure the background is clutter-free. We always say if you can just have a plain background, even better, like a plain white wall. Lighting is also really important. If you can be facing a window, so you've got the natural light on your face, fantastic. Or you can have some lamps or something to actually illuminate your face. Otherwise, you end up looking like a silhouette. Audio, letting people know, as some of you shared, letting people know in your dorm or in your house that you're on an interview. So don't make any loud noises or do anything too radical or silly. And then also, I loved, hey, Adriana, you mentioned that if there is a glitch, that's okay. We're all kind of navigating this world and glitches happen, tech challenges happen. So it's just having an open mind to it. Now, on the topic of maybe glitches or things going wrong in an interview, what's the one thing that you would encourage a job seeker to never do? So what's sort of the biggest mistake that they can make? And then the second part to that question is, if they make a really big mistake, how can they try and rebound from that? How can they try and recover? So it might be from your own personal experience, what you've seen someone do, or just what you know in your mind. I'd love to hear from you.
A lot. I think I can jump in. Oh, sorry. I can jump in. Thanks. There's a lot, I think, of mistakes that can come to mind. But I think that one is really just making sure you have some pre-formulated questions, and really good questions too. So I think someone mentioned it earlier, not things that you can just find quickly by Googling, do some research on the site, look at their CSR reports, look at recent news, just familiarize yourself and have some really good questions. I've seen a lot of candidates maybe ask one, and maybe because they're very nervous, they're kind of done, after that one, and, thinking, great, I checked the box, I asked my question. But I think to an interviewer, that could show that you're not really as interested in the company. So make sure that you have some. And if you end up running out of time in the interview, that's okay. And maybe you didn't get all of your questions in. So I would even recommend, as you send a follow-up, thank you, if that's possible, to the interviewer, you could also include those too and just let them know, I know we didn't get to cover all of these, but here's a couple of other thoughts that I had or questions. And definitely feel free, to send those along, because I think that will show that, you were invested, and maybe just time or technology, something didn't cooperate in the interview to allow you to ask all those questions. So that would be one area.
Yeah, I will add, for soon-to-be grads, university grads, it is a time where you're just probably doing a lot of interviews, which is really exciting, right? Like, I think some schools even have seasons where we're just heavily interviewing. So my advice there would just to be, to prepare in advance for those. But I've definitely seen, where you can tell that it's just like, I'm just going through the motions of the interview. So as much as possible, even though you may have a lot of companies that you're interviewing with, to just be in the moment with that company, really have done your homework and prep for that interview. And then really leverage your recruiter. I think that there's some appropriate questions that would be better suited for the recruiter versus an interviewer or hiring manager. So I think just parsing out those questions so that you're getting those questions answered for yourself, but there's also a positive experience on the interview stage.
Thank you, Ashley, Andrea, and Adriana. Now, on the topic of the question itself, do you feel like there's one great question that every candidate should be asking? And I know it's a tricky one because you don't want anything to come across as too contrived or too prepared, but is there something that to you reveals, this person is really curious, they've done their research, and they clearly want to be here? Have you come across a question like that?
I don't know if there's one question that would always, in every scenario, sort of wow me, but I always like when someone is self-aware. So I would say the question of, or, however they want to frame it, what need can I fill in your team? Where do you have a need? Where can I contribute or give back to your team. And it's not all about you, how will I learn, how will I grow, or what will I be doing my first, day or week in the job? How can I best help you? Where's the need on the team? And I think that self-awareness truly kind of makes you a different candidate. So you know that this person is going to fill the right need and is in the know of what needs to happen when they start the role.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions I recommend candidates ask is asking their interviewer why they choose to work there or why they chose to join that company. Because then you're getting a genuine answer. It's individual to that interviewer, but it's also kind of a two-way question, because then the candidate can learn from the interviewer, a little bit potentially more about the company culture or what the type of work would be on that team. So I always encourage them to ask a question like that.
I think I'll just add, asking about not only, what would what would success look like today on the team, but, even asking a couple years out, because I like that question, because I think then it shows that you're interested and invested in kind of helping that team to achieve the success. So you're not just looking at, what happens in 3 months from now when I start, but really looking at, whatever it is, if you say, a year out or 3 years out, 5 years, I think just showing that you're interested in hearing more about, what is kind of that future success look like and how you can be a part of it.
Some wonderful pieces of guidance. So we had demonstrating self-awareness. So showing that you know what your skills are, your strengths are, and finding ways to actually link that to the role and actually the company's goals. We had asking why they chose to work there. What was it that brought you into this company and what's kept you here? And then we had, what would success look like today? And also, what would it look like in years to come? And then again, it demonstrates that you're not only interested in what's in it for me, you're actually also interested in okay, what's here for the long term? How can I continue to add value? And actually, what does my growth look like? Which then ties into your self-awareness piece. Fantastic. Now, another question that I know comes up a lot, and it's so important when it comes to finding the right fit. So obviously skill fit is important, character fit, but cultural fit within a company is super important. But for a lot of people, they don't know how to actually assess that. How do they figure out what the cultural fit of a team or a company is? So how can a candidate, especially if they're new, if they're sort of a fresh grad, how can they figure out that they are the right fit for your company? And then in an interview, how can they actually prove and demonstrate to you that they are the right fit for your company?
That's a great question. I think for the first half of it, right, when you're trying to assess if the company's culture is the right fit for you, some of the questions you want to ask are maybe about their developmental programs. Do they have programs for early career professionals? Do they have rotational programs so that as you grow your career, you can span and sort of dive into different areas of the organization and learn more about them? Do they have employee resource networks or employee resource groups so you can join and kind of give back to the company, but also connect with like-minded folks? And those are some of the small things that you can do, right? To understand, and some of that should be on their website to get a better feel. But asking what work-life balance feels like, and not asking one person, but asking multiple people the same question, engaging answers, because a lot of times you can read between the lines and understand if there's a culture that maybe isn't as healthy as it should be. So those are the things you want to try to pull out. And then if you are using, a website to check reviews, right? Take those with a grain of salt. A lot of the negative reviews are not always accurate. But what you're going to do is really hear sort of the truth a lot of times from the actual employees that are still there.
I think that a lot of those areas are good ones to ask about. I also think just thinking about the size of the company too, and especially in big companies, I think sometimes it's harder to sort of gauge that culture or where you might fit in and kind of getting at that information. So I think thinking about that, and I do like the approach that Ashley mentioned about asking different people within the company, because you may get some different responses to that. But I think starting with some of those basics, I agree, the colleague resource groups is a really good one to find out, more about the company, big or small.
Wonderful. Now, I'm curious as well to look at this area of soft skills, because I know for a lot of people who are graduating and are looking for roles, some of them have internship experiences, some of them have volunteer experiences at university, but for a lot of people, they don't have prior work experience in terms of professional experience they can put on a CV, but they would bring various soft skills that they've developed throughout their studies and through anything extra that they've done. What would you say, in terms of your experience, what is the importance of soft skills when you're just starting your career? And what would you say are the top 3 soft skills for fresh graduates to either develop or really dial up when it comes to interviews and demonstrating that they're a great fit?
I can start with one, I guess. I don't know all 3, but one that I think is really important is problem solving skills. And that's a hard one sometimes, I think, to be able to communicate, and especially if you haven't had a lot of work experience. So what I always tell students is there probably is a lot of problem solving that you're doing and skills that you've built through either maybe in on-campus leadership positions in organizations, and you can come up with an example from there, or through maybe a significant class project. So some of those things I would definitely still include on your resume as a new grad, and also really think about because I think all companies are really interested in hearing how you think, how you approach problems, and coming up with some examples from those experiences versus work experience. If you don't have that, and having some of those prepared, I think will really help you in the interview process.
Yeah, I would say 2 other skills, soft skills that are pretty important that you can leverage a lot of projects or on-campus experience is teamwork and collaboration. It will go hand in hand with, I think, pretty much any role. So just leveraging those soft skills in the interview process, practicing those behavioral questions in advance, but being very direct of, from your resume, like, okay, these are projects that could translate, these skills could translate over. But they're skills that you're going to hit at any role. So knowing how to speak to it in an interview will be very helpful.
I would say that, at this part of your career, before you have a ton of experience or much experience at all, your soft skills are sort of at the core of who you are and what a company's looking at you for to potentially grow and sort of develop, I think, as you both said. So, always being inquisitive and asking questions, being, ever always wanting to learn, but also being, it's kind of cliche, like being able to work independently, but also as part of a team. Right. And it's just so important, because you need to be an independent thinker, be able to ask your own questions, be able to contribute during meetings and what have you. But also you need to be a team player. And that means learning how to build on other people's ideas and not necessarily shoot down someone else's idea because it competes with yours. But how do you add and plus, and add to someone else's idea? And that makes you a team player that can also contribute your own idea. So that's important.
Yeah, brilliant. A great collection of soft skills there. So we had problem solving. So relying on previous experience that may not be professional experience, but things that you've done at university, things that you've done in teams. How have you actually worked through solving problems? Leveraging other on-campus experience with teamwork and collaboration, because again, hugely important when it comes to coming into the workforce, being able to demonstrate that you can work collaboratively with other people. At the same time, also being inquisitive and curious and actually having a growth mindset, having that very independent way of thinking, but then balancing it again with working collaboratively as a team. And a couple of you mentioned the importance of practicing your questions beforehand, practicing your responses beforehand, being really clear on, okay, what are some great examples that I know I can share? How would I share them if I'm asked about these things? And then having, I think, Ashley, you mentioned having a cheat sheet or something during the interview itself, where you've noted down a couple of these things, because we all know what it's like sometimes when you get into an interview and all of a sudden the nerves take over, your heart is racing and your mind goes blank. And then, we don't perform as well as we know we could. So having something down where you've taken time to write these. And I always add an extra step at the end. Whenever it comes to sharing an experience, A lot of us are aware of the STAR framework. If anyone who's tuned in is really interested in learning how to frame up responses, I really encourage you to go onto the monster.com/grads webpage. I was just looking at it recently, and there's so much information in there helping you to get clarity on even what careers to apply for, how to position your strengths, how to write your resumes, and importantly, how to answer some of the most commonly asked questions. So I always add an extra piece when it comes to answering these questions. Answer the question, share your experience using a STAR framework. And then at the end, you can even include, and here's what I learned about this experience. So you take it one level beyond and you say, okay, from this experience with teamwork, I actually learned how important it is to have a team where everyone has diverse opinions, because that's when you can really be innovative. That's when it's the most challenging, but you learn the most. So you almost add your extra 2 cents in terms of what did you learn from that? And the benefit is that if the experience isn't necessarily a great one, you can then say, what I learned from this experience is what not to do next time this happens. So it allows you to take real ownership of everything in your past and really start to demonstrate your self-awareness and your desire to grow. So a couple of really great things in there. Now, we've been talking a lot so far about the interview itself, which has been fantastic. I want to take us back a little bit to the cover letter and actually the resume when we're applying for roles, because if we don't have a great cover letter and resume, we might not even make it to the interview stage. So I'd love to know from you, what do you think? So there's two parts to this question. What are the key things that you're looking for in a resume? And it might be some of the soft skills that we've mentioned, or it might be links to the job description and the requirements in there. So what are you looking for in a resume? And what's something that has maybe surprised you once that someone's put in a resume, but it really made them stand out?
Yeah, I can start with that. Yeah, I think for me, it's, a really well organized resume. Initially, what I'm looking for is, is this candidate a match for the role? So if we're talking about a university grad role, I'm looking at their graduation dates. And so, having that close to the top where it's very easy to read helps guide me through the rest of the resume. At Pinterest, we, a lot of our internship programs are more technical. So looking for technical skills and that sort of thing. But, the key here is, does it read easily and does it flow well? And, one thing that I noticed, which I really enjoy reading resumes, is how well-rounded they are. We just finished hiring for another internship program and found a few candidates who were small business owners, which, I was excited to learn a little bit more about that. So it's always nice to just see well-rounded resumes that are not just about the role that they're interviewing for. It helps me just better understand the bigger picture and what they're bringing to the table.
I'll jump in next. I think that, yes, 10 people, what to put on a resume, you'll get 10 different answers. So, it's always sort of up in the air. But when people say that your resume should stand out, I know personally, I don't think it should stand out because of the formatting, right? It shouldn't be different. I think there's sort of a standard format that you should follow, and it should follow that format. It doesn't mean, big bold letters or different colors or pictures. Like, that's not how you make your resume stand out. Your resume stands out because it's succinct, it's clean, the punctuation's correct, and Andréa, like you said, I think, it says it tells a good story, right? It follows and it's well-rounded and it flows. So what stands out for me at some time, for some resumes, is the interest. I think that's always really cool for me to just read the interest. Like, this is what you've done, I can follow through this, but what are your interests outside of work? What do you do? What clubs are you a part of? It's a really important piece of telling your story. And so those are the things I would say that really help a resume stand out, or, for me, get noticed. But the one other piece I'd add is that don't assume that the recruiter or the person reading your resume knows or fully understands everything you've done. So include it all, right? Myself, I don't have a scientific background, but I review scientific resumes. So all those techniques that you may use as a scientist need to be on there, because I'm doing a keyword search as well. And I need to make sure that you check all the right boxes before I hand you off to the hiring manager and say, here you go, this person checks the right boxes. So don't assume that we know it all. Just, make sure it's all included in there.
I agree with all of those things. I think I would just add that adding some really concrete examples of what you have done on your resume is really helpful. So wherever you can quantify things. So, rather than just saying that, you led a fundraising effort for an on-campus organization that you're a part of, actually putting in there, what did that actually mean? How many people did you reach out to? What methods did you use to reach out to try and, source funding? And then ultimately, what was the result? So I think wherever you can put that in on your resume to fill in some of those gaps and just add additional detail, if someone, all they have to go by initially is that, your resume on a screen, where can you fill in some of those details for them? And, you never know what might stand out within there that could be helpful to you and kind of moving forward in the process. So I don't think that in some of those instances that you can include, too much detail. I think all of those things are good to include.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Great insights in terms of what to actually put in the resume and the cover letter. And it was interesting that all of you shared the importance of structure and flow. And, when we talk about standing out, it doesn't mean having photos and images and big text and colors. You might stand out, but not necessarily for the right reasons. It's all about making sure that you're telling a story about who you are, because that's all someone's got to go off. They literally have words on a page. And so you want to take time to actually make sure that you're articulating where you're at, what you've done, highlighting, as was shared, the concrete and quantifiable impacts that you've had. And, perfect, Andréa, that you mentioned it. If you have helped with volunteering or fundraising, how much money did you raise? What else did you do? What are the numbers that you can include in that? Because that conveys real value that you've been able to contribute. And there were a couple of other pieces that were really worthwhile mentioning. Interests. Often what we find with a lot of people who are earlier in their careers, they forget that their interests and their passions outside of work are still really, really relevant. And you want to bring that in because that gives your resume and your CV, it gives it personality. It allows you to shine through. So definitely include them. And even when it comes to interviews, there are generally opportunities to be able to bring some of them in. If you love rock climbing, if you love traveling, not that we've been able to travel much for the last little while, but if you love baking, whatever it is, there might be an opportunity for you to weave that in while you're providing your answers and your responses. So some brilliant insights there. Now, what about gaps on a resume? So I think, Adriana, you mentioned that it's really helpful to look at graduating year, especially if someone's looking to come into a graduate level internship. But what if someone has decided to take time off, whether it's because they had to care for a loved one at home, they decided they just wanted to take a year off, they did something else. What's your view on gaps? How can we address gaps and position them in a way that's not going to detract from, whether someone is considered a suitable candidate?
Yeah, I think this is where the cover letter is a really great opportunity to highlight potentially that, in where in the resume it's like, oh, okay, I noticed that there's a gap. But I think just given the times that we're in now, speaking from my own recruiting experience, it's, potentially now gaps are probably a little bit more common that, because of the situations that we're in right now. So I think, once you connect with your recruiter, you can share a little bit more, but yeah, I think your resume needs to flow as it flows. And then you leveraging your recruiter and your cover letter to better explain maybe the potential gap.
I'd add to that if you don't have a career or a cover letter, when you're explaining your gaps, you want to be short and succinct. I've had a lot of people sort of try to over-explain where I didn't have that many questions about it, but they went on and on and on about it. So be short, succinct. I took this time off to take care of a loved one or a sick family member, like you mentioned, or I, left my last job and was looking for a new job. But in that time, I, continued to work and sharpen my skills and took some industry-related classes or courses. But be short, succinct, and explain it. If there are additional questions, they'll ask. But don't assume that they need to know every detail, and just share what you need to and keep going.
Yeah, wonderful guidance. And it is important to cover it in a cover letter because it will be a question that will likely be asked or a question mark in the mind of the interviewer. But again, over-explaining, when we over-explain, it's generally because we're nervous about how someone will perceive something. And so we try and compensate, and then we completely over-explain. And that actually detracts from how we're coming across, from our confidence and our perceived competence. So again, no need to over-explain. As Ashley said, just a very brief explanation what it was. If the interviewer wants to know more, they'll ask, but you just basically provide almost like a one-liner. What did you do? And how are you now ready to re-enter the workforce? As simple as that, that's all you need to share. So thank you all for your insights on that. I have a broader question. And this is based on your experience working with people at the start of their career, coming into the workforce. What is the one thing or a couple of things that you wish more candidates knew about the job search process? What do you wish that they could be aware of before they kind of get through it that might actually help them have more success?
I'll take this one first. I'd say just their confidence, right? I think a lot of times I talk to early career professionals that are a little bit nervous or unsure of their skill set and sort of their value. And I think you have to always exude that confidence because it'll rub off on others. But because you're their future talent, you have a lot of potential. So come in, be positive about your experiences and what you've done. And going back to the resume piece, I think there's a lot of folks that will also, take off a piece of their resume because they don't feel it's important. I just worked a retail job, or it was just customer service. Those are important skill sets to learn and that you have honed, right? So you can bring that to the workforce, but also shows your time management capabilities, right? So you were in school full time, but also working 15, 20 hours. So that time management will translate to what you do in the workplace too. So be confident in your background and your skill set and what you've done and let it show through in the interview.
I think, and this goes for both in the job search process, but I think when you're also kind of fresh, starting in a new role at a new company, just not underestimating the power of networking and connection and pre-job or, pre-starting the job, when you're looking, connecting. Maybe there's a former intern that goes to your school and you can connect with them on LinkedIn to learn more about their experience, and just getting all those pieces of information for yourself beforehand to better help you prepare for the interview process, but also to just help yourself make a good decision for the next step in your career and what you want to do. And then I think when you're starting new at a company, is really being open to that and networking with individuals within the company, even if it's just a quick, coffee chat at some point to learn more about what other people's jobs are, other roles outside of your immediate business area that you're working in. I've seen grads, and again, just speaking kind of from some of my own experience in hiring new grads, be really successful that way in establishing some of those connections. So I think being open to that and actually doing that purposely is important.
Yeah. And the job search and the interview process is just that, a process. So so my advice, especially for candidates who are interviewing and for multiple roles at different companies, is to know their own timeline and be very direct with their recruiters about that, so that when it comes to the decision-making time, that you've been able to finish all of the processes and you can make an informed decision for yourself. But yeah, timeline, knowing the steps of the interview process for the jobs that you're interviewing for, and then roughly kind of what your timeline is, so that if you have deadlines, you can just clearly communicate those.
Wonderful. I'll give a quick recap because there was so much there. So we started with exude confidence. So be positive. You might just be starting out in your career, but that doesn't mean that you don't bring anything. You actually do bring things. You bring a unique perspective. You bring your experiences that you've had. And then there was this piece around not shying away from demonstrating your involvement in side gigs or side hustles or anything extra that you've done that might seem unrelated to the job or the industry that you're applying for. Even though they're unrelated in terms of what you will be doing, the skills that you have developed will always be relevant. Whether it's around time management, preparation, the ability to connect with people, building relationships, working with data, whatever it is, focus on that. How can you really bring that to the surface? Because they're, the strengths and the skills that you're bringing. We also had Andréa mentioned the importance of making connections with people, and the importance of networks even before you get to the interview stage. So this might involve a LinkedIn search. If you just search the name of a company in a LinkedIn search, often it will come up with people who are close to you in terms of the number of connections apart. And so that way you can have a look and see, is there anyone here that did go to the same university as me? Is there anyone that I know through someone else who I can ask them to connect me with them? So there's a lot we can do before we even get to the interview stage. And the benefit of connecting with people who might already work in the company is you can ask them questions about, what is the culture like? What is the growth like? What are your thoughts on that? So it gives you more insight when it comes to the interview to be able to ask the right questions, but also for you to determine whether it's a place that you want to work. And then also that doesn't end just before the interview. Once you get into a role, how can you leverage connections? How can you make new connections? Whether it's a coffee catch up, whether it's a virtual catch up, see if you can actually, maybe one every 2 weeks, see if you can connect with someone to actually just learn about them and what they're doing. And then of course, offer to add value to them if there's some way you can help them. And then finally, know your timeline and be really direct. Be really open about what that is. You might even like to ask at the end of the interview, what are the next steps in the recruitment process, so that you're aware as to how long it might take them to get back to you, which then just gives you a greater understanding as well in terms of what you need to do in your own life to make sure that you're actually ready. So wonderful insights. Thank you, everyone. I have a question specifically around sometimes an awkward conversation or an awkward piece when it comes to interviews, and that's the discussion around money, around salary. So we had a question that came through. Employers are posting my desired positions, but the salary is much less than the industry standard. How do I answer the salary expectation question when my worth is higher than the maximum posted on the job site? What are your thoughts on navigating this?
I think any decision or any answer you have or pushback that you have needs to be fact-based. So take your time. Don't feel the need to push back or be aggressive in the negotiation at the point you find the salary is not what you want. Say thank you for the offer. I really appreciate it. Make sure they know that you're excited about the opportunity so they don't think you're pulling back or pushing back because you're not interested. Maintain that excitement about the role and then go back and do your research. So if you're finding it's a customer service role and it's X amount, but you think you should be getting $10,000 or $5,000 more, go back and say, okay, I have 5 years of experience. The role calls for 4. So I've got more experience. So I think I'm worth more. The industry's the standard or average for this role is X. So go back with those fact-based, sort of points and say, this is why I would like to request more, and see what they say, right? It's a negotiation. You don't want to turn them off by being too aggressive or negative, but you want to share that, I know how to fight for my position with facts and sort of an informed decision.
I would just say, the conversations about salary is making sure that those are done with the appropriate person in the recruiting process too. You don't want to jump into that with the first interview with the hiring leader. That's something that I think is more appropriate for the recruiter conversation. And oftentimes, recruiters are going to be having some of that conversation with you up front just to make sure that expectations across the board from both the company side as well as, your expectations are aligned, and having that conversation. And oftentimes, recruiters will talk through that before kind of going forward in the hiring process to other steps. So I think that, I agree with what Ashley said, but I think also just making sure it's just with the right person in the interview process so that you're not coming across as not being interested or only caring about the salary and kind of asking the wrong people in the process. But, having that open dialogue with the recruiter is what I would encourage.
And then the last thing I would add is that oftentimes that first number that's discussed is base salary. So having a conversation with your recruiter about what does total compensation look like, what else is included in that full number, to see if, it's going to meet your expectations, and also be in line with what the company is going to offer. So I think just like asking as many questions as possible to fully understand what that total compensation package would include.
Yeah, wonderful insights. Thank you, everyone. The importance of being confident, being aware of what you bring, doing your research. So actually going on sites like glassdoor.com, salary.com, payscale.com, just to understand what's the industry paying for that level and your level of experience. And then practicing a response. But importantly as well, asking what is the total compensation here? Because you might only be getting a small part of the puzzle. And really, I think, it's so important that we don't shy away from these conversations. A lot of people feel awkward discussing them, but we need to just we need to normalize having these conversations. The worst that's going to happen is they're going to come back and say, look, we haven't budgeted more than that. This is our final offer. This is what we can do. And then you make an informed decision on that. But if you don't ask, there's never an opportunity to try and negotiate or see what is possible. And importantly, to Andrea's point, make sure you're having the conversation with the right person. So you want to make sure that it's not really, really early on, because it could be entirely the wrong person to be having that conversation with. But fantastic insights there. We've had another question come through, which is again related to the interview itself and specifically related to some questions. So we know that sometimes very common questions that arise are things like, what is your greatest strength? Or what is your greatest weakness? What would your advice be when it comes to how to answer these questions? What is it that you're looking for if you were to ask these kinds of questions?
Sorry, I guess those are always trap questions. Are most likely going to be asked, but I think a lot of times people don't always prepare for them. So for your strengths, I assume you should be able to come up with some pretty straightforward strengths that you have, but you want to give example. Your strength is communicating. Talk about how you communicated, the intent and outcome of a project to a team or led a team. So whatever that strength is, make it short, succinct, but keep it very factual and use that. But when you talk about your weaknesses, what you don't want to do is give them a chance to discount you for what your perceived weakness is. So you want to provide a weakness and then also a solution. So if you have trouble staying organized, I used to be unorganized, but I found that if I made a to-do list in the morning, checked it midday, and then circled back at the end of the day before my next day, it helped me keep track of what I was doing day to day and become much more organized. It was a weakness, but they can't discount strike you that against you because you provided a solution for it already.
Yep, and I think with those questions, as Ashley said, they're bound to come up. I always encourage candidates to try to align some of the strengths with some of the things that they're looking for in that particular job, and then tie in your previous experience or your transferable skills. Because we have many strengths. Sometimes the question is like, what are your 3 strengths? And they, may not always be the same for that role that you're interviewing for. So I think just trying to find alignment where you can. And of course, with the areas of growth, it's like, what have you learned? How much have you grown from that?
So definitely, trap questions to be aware of, trap in, these, because it's easy to make a mistake and it's easy to become nervous and anxious and actually not give the response that they're looking for. And so when it comes to strengths, it's really about focusing on things that align you perfectly to the role you're applying for, whether it's the soft skills that you have, whether it's something that's outlined in the job description, highlighting that and giving a really tangible example. And then when it comes to weaknesses, there's always 2 things I share with people. Don't share a weakness that directly links to the role you're applying for. So if you're applying for a role in sales, you don't want to say that my weakness is sales, because unfortunately you've completely discounted yourself. And if your weakness is sales, I'd encourage you not to apply for a role in sales at all. It might not be the right path for you. So definitely, do your work beforehand. In fact, on the monster.com/grads page, there is an option to go and have a look at what career paths are best suited to you based on your strengths. And I thought that was a brilliant tool. So actually, I encourage you to check that out if you're kind of curious about it. So that's your first thing. Don't link it to something that's essential for the role. And then secondly, you can be honest about a weakness that you have, but importantly, you want to talk about what is the solution? How have you been working on that weakness? So a simple example could be, one of my greatest weaknesses is that I get really anxious speaking in front of large groups of people. But I know how important this is for my career development. So I'm really committed to actually developing skills in this space. I've signed up to a Toastmasters course. I've gotten some books and done some online programs about how to develop confidence. And I'm looking for opportunities to do more of that. And in fact, the last time I did this at university, my lecturer commented that I had gained so much confidence. Something like this just highlights that you're very self-aware, you know what your weakness is, but you're also committed to growth, because that's often what is being looked at as well. Are you aware of what your weaknesses are and what are you doing about it? So let's now look at this classic challenge that a lot of people who don't have a lot of real professional experience, they may have experience with volunteering and other things, but they come to apply for a role which is positioned as an entry-level role. However, it calls for multiple years of experience. And it's this constant challenge because, if no one's willing to give you experience because you need experience for a role, how are you ever going to get the experience to be able to then apply for the roles? So it's this massive catch-22. What are your thoughts when someone who has just graduated is looking to, or about to graduate, looking to apply, and a role says that they're looking for, say, 2 to 3 years of experience?
Jump in. I think, and again, just kind of speaking from my experience, I do think it's important to look at that, to make sure that you're not applying, though, for something that truly you won't be considered for. So I know I've seen students before and maybe it is, and if it says 3 years of professional work experience, maybe that's not the right role. But I think sometimes for recent grads, there could be some more leeway, in that 1 to 2 year experience. And sometimes some jobs will even say 1 year of professional work experience and or internship equivalent or something else in there that you can find. So I would be realistic, but I think also, there are some ways to get around that. Definitely, internships, I think, can count, especially if you've had a couple. I think that other activity that you have, we talked earlier on about some transferable skills. So some of those things you might be able to kind of really market and focus on in your resume or your cover letter when you're applying to those roles, so that, you're not kind of passed over for that. So those are kind of a couple of thoughts I would add there.
I'll add to that too, and I think those are all really good points. You always want to try to stretch yourself to apply to roles that may be a stretch for you to learn and increase your skill set. But I think, as Andréa said, right, you don't want to, if there's calls for 3 years of work experience and you don't have that, that's a bit too much. So look at the minimum qualifications versus the preferred qualifications. There should be some tells in there. I think an internship, like you mentioned, is a great opportunity to kind of get your foot in the door at a company and sort of get that experience, prove yourself, get to know folks, network, and then, roll into a full-time role, hopefully. But also contract roles or temporary positions are a great way, or temp to perm positions even, for another way for you to get your foot in the door, right? I think if you look at the same role for a contractor versus a full-time employee, the hiring manager may be looking for you to check all 10 of those boxes for a full-time employee, and then maybe 6 of those boxes for a contract role, right? So that's where that's your way in the door to get in, prove yourself, network again, and really grow, learn the company culture, and see if you can move into that full-time role. So you have to be a bit creative and look at it. But the one thing I would say you don't want to do is apply to too many roles at too many levels. A lot of times recruiters have access to your candidate profile and can see the different positions you've applied to. So don't apply to 8 positions at 6 different levels. Make sure you're being very targeted and thoughtful in your approach.
Adriana, any final words that you wanted to share yourself?
Gosh, I don't really have anything additional to add. I echo what has already been shared about just like, doing a little bit of research and, targeting roles within a level that you think is appropriate.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, look, a huge thank you to Adriana Garcia from Pinterest, Ashley Jefferson from Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and Andréa Juliano from CVS Health. It's been wonderful to be here with you and to seek your guidance and your input and your advice for grads. So we're now getting to the end point. I want to provide a little bit of a summary and just sort of an overview of everything, because there's been so much value in this. So I think a couple of the key messages here is really starting with believe in yourself. You have to believe in yourself when you're going through this process, because if you don't believe in yourself, no one else is going to believe in you. So believe in yourself, really leverage the soft skills that you've developed from your time at university, from any internships that you've had, any volunteering that you've had. The skills that were discussed were things like teamwork, collaboration, the ability to think independently and be autonomous. We also had problem solving. And there's a huge number of examples you'd be able to provide from problem solving when it comes to group work or working through a challenging assignment you might have been given. Again, highlight all of these soft skills, really bring them through. The importance as well around being prepared for interviews. So have your cheat sheet, have your resume with you, know the job description you're applying for really well. Ask for quiet time in your space so that you don't have housemates or family interrupting you during the session. Clean out if it's a virtual environment, make sure you have a very clear background, no clutter, good audio, things like this. You want to be making eye contact with the camera if you can. Practice your questions, have a list of things that they might ask and get really comfortable with answering them. Have a number of examples from your experience that you can call on, stories that really highlight these strengths and these skills. And importantly, really demonstrate your desire to grow, demonstrate your curiosity, do your research about the company. And it's not just what's on their website, it's actually looking in the news, it's looking at their CSR reports, looking at anything else that might be interesting and having some questions that you can ask them to demonstrate that you're curious, you're enthusiastic, and you genuinely want to be there. All of these things can really, really help you stand out. But importantly, it starts with you believing in yourself. So again, I want to thank you all so much, Andréa, Ashley, Adriana, and everyone who's tuned in. The good news is that this webinar has been recorded, so you will all get access to this webinar so you can watch it again. Anyone who's registered will be able to watch it. And I want to encourage you as well to do check out the monster.com/grads page, the webpage. It is full of so much information. As I shared, I was just looking at it the other day, and I was blown away by how much there is in there, in terms of knowing what pathway to take, how to write your CV, your cover letter, resume, how to respond to the most commonly asked interview questions. It's all there. So highly encourage you to go and check that out. It's been wonderful. I hope everyone who's tuned in has gotten a huge amount out of it. And a big thank you again to all of our panelists and again to Monster for this wonderful initiative. We wish you all the very best on your interview journey.